All right, here we are again. Welcome to the College Football Players Association podcast. Once again, we are doing our Alumni Member of the Month series. We're going to start some different series here in the month of November, but as we close out October, we try to get in an alumni member before the end of October. We're recording on October 30th, and God willing, we will have this uploaded on October 31st to celebrate Halloween with our October Alumni Member of the Month is Kassidy Woods. Kassidy is also on our leadership committee, Alumni Member Leadership Committee, and so I know Kassidy really well. We're going to be talking about a lot of familiar things, but hopefully we can keep it all fresh for people who don't know your story, Kassidy. But really happy to have you here.
Jason, thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm so excited. It's just cool to see the growth and all the things that CFBPA is doing. So really excited to have such a genuine conversation and the topics that we touch.
That's very kind of you to say. And so we'll get into that because it's been a long road for me and you. And I think we maybe had our first conversation in 2021 at some point. I'd have to go back and look at my notes to even figure it out. Long way since. You were in my wedding this summer, so let's just say there's been a lot of events since then. So we'll get into everything. But first, I want to start in the same way that I start with any alumni member on this series, which is to say, okay, let's talk college football. And so what that means is for you, you've had such an interesting story, right? If I counted correctly, it's 3 different programs, 4 different head coaches. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
So take us through Kassidy Woods, college football, position, years, schools, coaches, because this is the kind of information I think a lot of the general public really wants to know. So take us through the journey, Kassidy.
Yeah, so I entered the business of collegiate athletics 2018, finished my year 2024. And what a ride it has been. Like you said, I had 4 head coaches, one that's very sentimental in the history of, college football, especially with the offense and everything. Mike Leach, rest in peace to him. I was grateful to be coached by him, even though he was very unapologetically himself.
There's a lot of Mike Leach stories out there.
People love him in the media, but man, I learned a lot from him in hindsight, looking back on it as a young 18-year-old. Now I'm 25, and now understanding the things that he taught us is very sentimental. And then I ended up getting coached by Coach Rolovich for a short, extended period of time.
And just for people who don't know, we're talking about Washington State here.
Yeah, Washington State. He ended up, taking the job after Mike Leach ended up leaving to go to Mississippi State. So before we even get into that, that was a whole big deal within itself as well. And then I ended up getting coached by Ed McCaffrey, my 3rd coach in the business of collegiate athletics. And then my last
school
at Northern Colorado. The transfer from Washington State to Northern Colorado. A great experience. I'm thankful I got to learn from an NFL legend, not only player-wise, but also as a family man as well. Like, it was really cool and to get close to his family and being coached by him. And then my last coach was Hugh Freeze. Ended up playing at the University of Auburn, walked on there. So, man, there's so many different ways that I've experienced this business, just playing-wise. Like, I started out as special teams. Most freshmen that gets into playing college football, you're going to earn your way to play. Not too many come right in with the opportunity to play right away. So I was one of those players that had to work my way into the field, and the special teams was my way of doing that. And then from there, ended up getting into the rotation as a wide receiver my 2nd year at Washington State, just because you got dudes that have solidified themselves, that are grown men. So you got to wait your turn in this business. So I waited my turn, played a little bit, had 6 receptions for 58 yards my redshirt freshman year. Nothing crazy, but it felt good for me because I'm, sitting behind some future 5th rounders who's in the league right now. Everybody's in the league right now playing. And that's what I'm working towards. And then I ended up playing, once I transferred, and had some great years at, I ain't gonna say great, pretty good, decent years. But made honorable mention at Northern Colorado, but I felt every emotion playing this game, from special teams to being a star player, and then to walking on the most humblest position in the collegiate athletics. But I wouldn't trade it for the world. I'm grateful for each experience to allow me to be able to understand what athletes are going through in each phase. And yeah, that's a little bit just about the head coaches and just my playing experience.
All right. So you keep using this phrase, the business of college athletics. All right. So is that a phrase you would have used 2018? You come in heavily recruited. I'm sure you had offers from a decent amount of schools. You told me you recruited basketball and football, right? And so,
Yes.
all right, so you got all these offers. You end up with Mike Leach, air raid, Washington State, ready to go. Did you think about things in those terms at the time, the business of college athletics? Is that anything that entered into your head as a young freshman coming onto that Washington State team? Or is that a mindset that you developed as you walked through your journey in college football, long 6-year journey, and where you're like, oh, yeah, maybe this is something more than I thought it was at the beginning?
A little bit of both. And the reason why I say that is because my dad, he played at the University of Missouri playing
Mm,
basketball. He told me these stories of just the business of it. But when you're young and you're not in it, you don't understand the level of magnitude that it goes. And especially in my generation, where, I entered into it where so much change was happening within the NCAA, just legislation wise, and
mm-hmm.
the transfer portal, um, being able to be granted to players and being able to transfer. And then NIL happened 2021. So my tenure being a collegiate athlete within the business, so many things, profound things, happen to where it was just like, whoa, it exposes the commercialization and professionalism that collegiate athletes have, and just within the whole system as a whole. So, man, getting into Washington State, it was very eye-opening just in terms of just the level and the magnitude. You had a legendary coach who brought in so much media attention, let alone fans, and to be able to do the things that we did in terms of just practicing away from our facilities with fall camp, that takes money. You're not realizing how much money it takes to do all these things and how much that you're not getting. But, in turn, you're grateful for the scholarship, grateful for all the other ways of compensation that you can get. But looking back on it now, shoo, I've definitely learned a lot, even more, to how much money is involved and just the business side of everything.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Let's talk a little bit about that. And I sort of want to open up this question. There's a lot of whistleblowers associated with the College Football Players Association, myself and Maddie and Troy and you and all these, I think people who sort of understand something about the system because of things they experienced, right? And so I think for somebody who doesn't know you, they would come in and hear this story as you just outlined it. And so you start, whoa, he's going to Washington State, at the time a Pac-12 school, right? And is no longer, but at the time, this is high Power 5 institution, very famous head coach. And whoa, it seems like you started kind of at the top of things, really, in a lot of ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now we associate the transfer portal, of course, in the public consciousness of the transfer portal is guys are going somewhere for a bigger payday. They're
Mm-hmm.
going to get the collective contract. They're going to get whatever, right? And it's looked at as a good thing. I think there's all sorts of complexity to that it doesn't take into account. But for you hit the transfer portal and you dropped to an FCS school.
Yeah.
You really went to a school that, I mean, I've talked with you a lot about it. We'll get to that, but struggled in terms of resources, the opposite of Washington State. All right. I want you to outline for folks why that happened, right? Because this sort of emerged in that COVID year of 2020. So why don't you kind of walk us through that
Yeah.
COVID year and sort of, that part of your journey.
And before then, I mean, you touched on a part where the transfer portal and the way that you depicted it, that only speaks for the top players who has the
Yes.
ability to be recruited. And
Good.
people miss the aspect of my case, I never transferred because I wanted to. I transferred because of head coaches telling me, hey, we're moving a different direction. Or as I get into COVID, me, interesting time, pandemic happening, life is slowing down. You're understanding what is more at stake. Is it my life, or is it making these institutions money? We're in a time where the virus is affecting my family. We don't know if my sister is going to make it. I had teammates who had passed away. I feel that my life is much more important, and I'm getting divine promptings that I should not play. So, do I not follow what is on my heart and soul, or do I tell and listen to what I'm being told by leadership organizations I'm involved in at Washington State, or getting told what I'm supposed to do by mere humans rather than what is on my soul, And for me, I'm not going to sacrifice the things that is on my soul. That's just how I was raised. And I'm a big believer in that. And so, yeah, I ended up, you know, getting to the nitty gritty of why I don't want to play and making sure that my fellow Pac-12 players understand that what's at stake here. You can have the option to play or not to play. That's up to you. But also, we want to make sure that we have the necessary means to make sure that our health and safety are taken care of, is considered, and our life is more important than money at this time. We can be at home with our families, physically present with them, and provide, more love and stability at home than it is, being how it was when we were just working out by ourselves, trying to build a community when we really can't really do that. We can't be around each other. How it was previously, we just on campus by ourselves with nobody else.
Good.
And so that's when I started talking to players, and me and a bunch of Pac-12 players, we ended up getting a group chat on GroupMe. We're like 400 of us talking about things that we want to do, having so many conversations. And that's when we came up with a list of demands. And mind you, when you're doing all this, you're not understanding the magnitude of what's going on and the conversation that we're having, and how this has never been done in the history of collegiate athletics to the magnitude that we're doing it. And so once that got leaked out, what was happening within our group chat and us potentially boycotting and having health and safety protections, that's when it really hit me on the magnitude of where this was going and how my coach wanted to have meetings with us. More just me in general, because I was a leader throughout my campus with creating the Black Student Athlete Association and things like that. So I met with him, and that's when he was.
So he requested that meeting then?
Yeah, he requested a meeting.
Interesting. He never told me that.
On the team at WSU, and then I ended up meeting with them again, just talking about everything that I'm telling you, what I'm feeling, and what I'm getting told, being part of these leadership organizations I was a part of. And just how they was telling me we'd be playing at our own risk with no specific plan in place. And what that means is we were going to workouts and practicing and then go get tested. So there was no logical testing being done. It was just a crazy time. We hearing stories from kids all over the Pac-12. They putting us by air conditioner units to cool us down to the right temperature so we can be able to practice. So it was very much forced for us to practice and have these games being played during COVID. And I'm glad this is being told so people can understand the inhumane side of this business and the extremes that it would go to for us to play, especially during a pandemic, And so, yeah, and then I ended up meeting with my coach again and wanted to record the conversation because me being far away from home, I'm from Texas, wanted my family to hear how that conversation went. I didn't ask for consent. I'm not thinking about that at 21, and that's where I missed the ball on, and I own up to that to this day. Because I never wanted to come off as like I'm backdooring my coach or making him look bad and listening to the media and things like that. So I definitely was wrong in that sense. But as far as him removing me from the team, me being a full scholarship athlete and not getting any meals during that time, and basically being blackballed from my team, and just the way I was removed was didn't make any sense at all. And so I ended up getting released and getting cut. And yeah, it was a trying time, but in hindsight, it ended up working out. But that tells you why I ended up going to the FCS level. Because even then, when talking to coaches and letting them know when I was in the portal and having all this film from a Power 5 conference, in a good school, because we had a great season, they ended up telling me, we're not going to recruit you because it looked like you threw your coach underneath the bus because of the recording. So these are all Power 5 institutions telling me that, not because I couldn't play, but because of, the stance that I took. And I mean, when you're doing these things, you understand, as a Black man in society, what you're up against and the risk of that. So me having conversations with my parents have prepared me, but it's different when you hear it from the words of your coach and the actions that took place to the extent of that it did. It's just like, whoa, like this is real, when you're taking a stance, there's definitely risk. There's definitely things that you have to be okay with losing in a sense.
Do you think you were ready for that at the time? Because I mean, you and I have talked, obviously I went through something similar.
Yeah.
Players I've advocated for went through something similar. I think I look back at myself and I was 40 years old or something at the time, right? And I think when I was doing my advocacy work at Minnesota on behalf of players, I was naive and I was 40 and I was like, oh yeah, I'm doing the right thing. And what these players are going through is unfair. And, you know, I think the retaliation you experience, in my case, at least, I felt like it was very unexpected. Was it unexpected for you? Did it really like wholly catch you off guard? Or did you go into this thinking, I'm organizing players. We got a group chat of 400 players and I'm going to talk to my coach and I'm recording it. So maybe in the back of your head, you're like, there might be repercussions here.
Honestly, I didn't even think about the repercussions until after.
Yeah.
And I'm thankful that I was very naive in that sense because I didn't feel any pressure from that. Because I was just so focused on what I felt in my soul, what I felt in my heart, what I felt on my mind that I've been tugging with and praying with, and just like this is out in the comfort of my head. I'm not worried about anything, but it didn't hit me until it all fell underneath the sink, and I'm just like, whoa, like okay, it's just me in my room, me by myself. I'm not a football player anymore. I don't know what any of this will look like. I don't know what my future will look like, but that's when it hit me.
Right. I know. At least we can laugh about it now. I mean, yeah, I had a very similar experience. I was like, oh, wait, I've lost my job. What? And so, yeah, I think it's essentially like exact same thing happened. That was your job, right? You lost it. And anybody who says it's not your job or, oh, you can, I mean, it's very funny to me because I look back on the pandemic, which I think tragically, I think people just want to forget and people want to move. Oh, let's just move on. Let's just move on. It's in the past and bygones, and I look back on that period. And I try to bring it up whenever I can, especially with this work, because what was exposed in the pandemic that you guys were the essential workers of college athletics, that
Yes.
without you, every department goes out of business and everybody knows it. Without the football players risking life and limb, without the football players being asked as the only undergraduates to come back to campus. I mean, that's what's so striking about it, right? Oh, the quote unquote the student athlete. Yes, of course, the student athlete. And we saw then that you're treated completely differently than every other student on campus. Yeah, you guys come to here, you isolate, you risk your health, you risk your safety. I mean, you always are risking your health and safety playing college football. Let's just add this pandemic to it. And so I just found it very striking, and that should have been that should have put a permanent rest to the lies of the NCAA, the sort of NCAA propaganda, but it didn't. It's like we're still having these same debates, even though the pandemic exposed that you guys are workers and you're the workers that everybody needs, right?
And it's just so funny that you said that because as time continuing to reveal itself, like you got these antitrust lawsuits and these settlements that are happening that proves that athletes have been exploited. And that notion of student athletes aren't essential workers or employees, that's definitely dying for sure. And the amateurism model is so corrupt and just terrible. But I'm thankful that we're on the receiving end of what's supposed to happen and the revolutionizing of this model and just the sport in general. And that's what's so cool about, this association. Like it's needed. And as time continues to progress itself, like we're still standing. And that's what's been most amazing for me, is just the ability to just continue to be that voice and continue to do this the way that we're doing it. And that's what's, I feel like, is more credible than any numbers per se. Yes, we'll get there, but that's beside the point. But I'm sorry, I can go on and on about stuff like that.
No, I mean, you hit the nail on the head, because the College Football Players Association wouldn't have existed without your guys' movement during that COVID summer. And, we had this sort of your movement in the Pac-12, and then it becomes this national movement, takes on a sort of new tone, right? Because I think then at that point, you guys had a much more extensive list of demands. And then it's like, okay, no, now we got like maybe 5 or 6 demands, but still one of those was the creation of a College Football Players Association. And I remember seeing that at the time, or hearing about it at the time. Dylan Bowles, who Dylan was on talk radio. I'm driving through Iowa. I'm going to tell stories of Minnesota players. I'm traveling down to Missouri, and I hear this guy who I didn't know Dylan at the time, but I hear him on the radio, and it's like, what's he talking about? Oh yeah, college football. That's exactly what's needed. Not thinking I was going to do this, but then it was like, I felt like somebody needed, I didn't necessarily want it to be me, but I felt like somebody needed to seize that energy, because if it wasn't captured, it was just going to fizzle out. And then it's like, oh yeah, you remember when the guys were talking about that in 2020? And now at least, yeah, it's like, do we still got work to do? Yeah. Do we still got growth to do? Yeah. Do we still have breakthroughs to happen? Yeah. But like the fact that we're still here and keeping this idea within the public consciousness, let's talk about, because I think too, what a lot of people don't understand is like, we're trying to past, present, future players. You're now a past player, and if college at least. But among current players, we have this very interesting and diverse membership body, right? Where we've got isolated Power 5 schools where we're growing, right? And trying to create first chapters at these very high level name brand schools that everybody knows. But then we've got a couple members here on some HBCU school, and some D3 guys and some D2 guys and a fair amount of FCS guys, and like including from your former program at the University of Northern Colorado. So talk about that, because you go down to FCS school, and man, I mean, I remember having some of those conversations with you, with just night and day difference.
Yeah.
And the ways in which the needs of an FCS player are just so strikingly different than a guy at Auburn or Clemson. And so tell people about that, because I don't think people really understand. I think people assume if you're at a D1 school, everything's kind of like okay or something. And that wasn't what you learned, right?
No, it wasn't what I learned at all. And I say, being a Power 5 athlete, you don't understand how good you got it until you're on the outside looking in. But I am grateful for the experience. Don't get me wrong. It definitely were pluses, well, pros and cons, but it definitely were pros in this sense of just being at the FCS level. But the flip side of that, just to give you context. So Power 5, you get meals, you get resources. So resources, I mean, training tables, resources in terms of media, equipment,
fitted helmets,
compensation that will pass you past rent.
Yeah.
Whereas when I was in the FCS level, there is no such thing as a full scholarship. Now, I don't know if it's the same as Montana State, schools that have really cemented themselves as one of the hierarchy and best football programs in the FCS, like Northern Dakota State and things like that. But Northern Colorado and most FCS schools is by aid agreement. So whatever the coach and you agree upon in terms of what they'll pay you, that's what they'll give you. And so for me, just to give you specifics, my scholarship was $667. And it decreased as the time that I was at Northern Colorado.
Wait, is that your stipend or is that your scholarship?
That was my stipend.
Stipend, okay.
Yeah, that was my stipend. I still was on full scholarship technically, because I didn't have to pay for any books or things like that in school. But that was my aid agreement, and so that was my stipend, and it only pay for rent. And there was a lot of times where I only had enough money to pay for just my rent and only $1 left to pay for meals. How you make that happen? Um, working. So I did work as a security guard. Um, I worked also as a like work study um, during the summertime just to receive extra money. So all FCS players know that they'll have to work to receive some extra money to be able to make ends meet and provide for themselves. But as far as getting meals, I didn't get meals as well. Being an FCS player in Northern Colorado, um, we also don't have the same resources in terms of training tables. Whereas like Washington State, you got so many tables to get worked on, so many trainers, so many student trainers to help you. That is limited. There's only like one cold tub and one hot tub, and a hot tub is like a little silver ice barrel that you can
Little
get in.
different.
I'm not dogging. I just want y'all to understand, like
I want to understand.
FCS programs are just like JUCO um, situations and things like that. So,
Mm-hmm.
and for me, that was eye opening because I'm just like, I'll still be a Division I athlete. There's no way there's that much of a drop off, and it is. It
Yeah.
is, and I'm grateful I had the experience because it allowed me to not take advantage of those resources once I got back into the Power Five level again. So,
All right. So now let's talk about that. So
mhm.
then for your final year, you hit the portal again because there's another coaching change at University of Northern Colorado. And it's not like you were forced out. And yeah, going back to your previous point, I think the vast majority, so many transfers at this point, people just don't understand. Their guys getting forced out. Now
Yeah,
the coaches use the transfer portal as another way, as another mechanism of control, right? As another mechanism to do what they want. So yeah, those high value players, okay, yeah, they benefit from the transfer portal and maybe
definitely.
get a big payday and whatever, but that's actually not the standard story, right?
Mhm.
And all right, so you hit transfer portal one last time and you end up in the SEC at Auburn as a walk-on.
Yeah.
And I know there's a hard decision for you, but you know, you and I guided by faith, and okay, this is the next step God wants for me. And so here we go. Off to Auburn, Alabama. Had you ever been to Auburn, Alabama? I've been to Auburn, Alabama a few times now, but have you ever been before you went?
No, never been. Just watched it on TV. When I was watching it growing up, Cam Newton was playing, so that
Yeah.
was one of my favorite schools.
Okay, so tell us about the difference because I like now you've had Pac-12, Power 5, drop down to FCS, and now you're back up again.
Mhm.
But you're in the SEC. Talk to me about the SEC. So, what for you really struck you as the kind of key differences between that experience and what you'd been through previous?
Not only was I in the SEC, I was at Auburn, and Auburn, they have the resources to do exceedingly and abundantly anything that they can to get, their athletes. And the cool thing about being a walk on, I had to face a lot of my fears, and one of them was just taking out a loan. How is that going to look with me being in debt? Because I've never been in that situation. And how am I going to eat? Because having my experience at the FCS level, I didn't know if I was going to get the same meals, if I was going to have to pay for them as a walk on. I'm probably not going to get a stipend because most people in my position who are walk-ons don't get that. But when
Mm-hmm.
you're at a school like Auburn in the SEC, they have collectives to where they can pay walk-ons. And so I was still getting compensation like $598 a month. And that's not even including the other things in terms of branding opportunities that they had with athletes threads and so much more NIL club and things like that, where you can get paid by posting certain graphics from
Hmm.
different boosters and things like that. So
Yeah.
that's what's very different. And then also just the resources upon resources. Like I thought I knew what resources were at Washington State, but that just multiplied times 10 being at Auburn for sure. And just their fans are everything, man. It's very community oriented. That's just how it is down south, especially being in the deep south in Alabama. Like everybody's gonna take care of you, especially if you're a football player. But I will say that just based off my experience and other athletes that I've been able to play with and talk to, when people think of collegiate athletes, they just think of a kid. And yes, we start out as kids, but we're grown men. I was a father. I never thought I'd be a father. I was a husband. Like, we're husband. We're brothers. We're sisters. We're wives. We're parents. Like, I was blessed to have my daughter my last year and experience that with her, and especially my wife. Like, I met my wife in college, so to have that experience my last year, like, that really showed me that we're more than just kids. We're we're humans, you know. We're grown. And so the things that mattered to me when I was 18, it wasn't the same when I was 24 and 25, you know,
Yeah.
in Auburn.
Yeah, that word kids, that word just gets tossed around so much. And I think, you know, I think the primary use of that term, especially when you hear people like Charlie Baker and others, administrators use it. I have a little bit more sympathy when coaches use it. But I think that, when administrators use it, I think it's this way to kind of denigrate who you are.
Yeah,
And as opposed to, it's like, college football is the second most popular professional sport in the United States behind the NFL. That's the reality. Okay. If we didn't have a century of NCAA propaganda, that's how you guys would be thought of, because that's how you should be thought of, because you make billions upon billions upon billions upon billions upon billions of dollars for everyone, and you're still not compensated for your labor. You get NIL money from collectives and whatever, and that's progress, but that's not being compensated for your labor. And
definitely.
so I think, yeah, that word, I think it's important to get, because all the guys I talk to are men who generate lots of wealth primarily for other people. And I've talked with tons of guys of the same position as you. They're 23, 24. They got a wife, they got a kid, they're adults, and this is their work, and they're trying to feed their families and create, opportunities and wealth for their families. And I
Definitely.
think that, how do we put that narrative front and center? How do we displace the kids thing? Like, if I have to hear Charlie Baker say kids one more time when he's referencing you guys, it's like, have some respect. Like, you make $3 million a year and it all comes primarily from men's basketball players. Like, have some respect for the men that make that kind of salary for you. Call them men at least.
Most definitely.
How do we
And
do that though?
it's so interesting. And I will say, I'm not saying that we have it all figured out, but I think the central piece from being a kid to a man, a lady to a woman, is the the thought of not thinking about myself and thinking about others. And I feel like once I started thinking and knowing and thinking past myself,
Hmm.
especially making that stance that I did, that's when the system doesn't want you to do it, because they don't
Mm.
want you to look at it as you have a whole community that you're involved with. And that's what's so beautiful about the CFBPA. It recenters your focus from thinking individually to
Hmm.
collectively as a whole. What can we do as a collective? Because what we do together is more important than what we can do individually. And that's what the system has been dependent upon. And I feel like legislatively, and people like Charlie Baker, like, they think that we as kids just they in the media, they feel like that we're just all about ourselves and money, when
Hmm.
that's not the case. A
Hmm.
lot of athletes think about the greater good of everyone else and want to see not only football players and those that have the most revenue, creating for the collegiate athlete realm. We want to see our Olympic sports succeed as well and be provided for as well. You know, it's not just all about football and basketball. Like, we're all in this together, and I feel like people miss that.
Hmm. That's well said. Okay, so I'll sort of play the counterpoint here, just to
Hmm.
not, so we're not just agreeing with one another.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
definitely.
I think there is an element here, and we've encountered this. Like, we understand this from organizing here over the past 3.5 years, that there is, like, the players. I would say the players, like, let's say a guy who's, maybe he's a star quarterback, he's making $1 million a year or something, right? We know those players exist now. And they have a lot of influence because of it. They have a lot of individual power on their team too, right? I mean, certain quarterbacks, I mean, I've had stories, just one yesterday, of just making demands on the team. It's not vice versa, right? How do we get, because we haven't had it yet, we thought we almost had it with Penn State, but then that wasn't the case. How do we get those influential players who have a ton of new individual power that 5 years ago college athletes couldn't have dreamed of? Okay. How do we get those guys? Because I don't think we've seen this yet. We've seen guys like you and other people willing to step out for the collective good, for the whole, for the community, right? For others. How are we going to get that super influential player though? Oh man, he's getting a 1.5 million from the collective, and 2 years I'm going to be in the league. Why do I care about any of this? How?
It's interesting you said that, and I don't have all the answers, and I really don't know if I'll give a good answer, but I will say what I've seen surface the last 2 days is pivotal players that on significant teams that make a lot of money at that quarterback position have gotten hurt and injured.
Yeah.
And so one way that I have and would like talk to a player with that caliber and that individual influence and power is like, what happens if ball ends? But if you do get injured, because that's the risk we take. We know it.
Yep.
We may not say it. Obviously, we're not thinking about it. But like Jake Tuttle, the quarterback from Michigan, like
Just saw that. Yeah.
how are you being provided for now? What resources do you have set up to make sure you're mentally okay, emotionally okay? What was that conversation like? Like, was the coach telling you, hey, with this injury, either you medically retire or you're off the team?
Yep.
We don't know what that conversation was like, but that happens.
Oh, heck yeah, that happens all the time.
That happens. And I'm not saying it did, but at the same time, it's just like, how is your school still taking care of you?
Yep.
What resources do you have in place? Yes, you have this money, but like, how will you use this money to better yourself, better your life, past your playing days? Because that's what it's all about. When we go into college, especially at an institution like Michigan and Washington State and Auburn, we're already told like we're nothing compared to the university. Like this university will outstand your tenure here. So like, what can you give to your university? What can you do for something bigger than yourself? So like,
well, in our last podcast with Tremaine, also on leadership committee, and Justin Faustinelli, leadership committee, Tremaine, you obviously both know them, and went to Clemson. And one of the things that Tremaine and I talked about is, no, it's actually the exact opposite. This university exists and grows because of the football team. Yeah. And I said to Tremaine, look, man, I'm telling you right now, until I really got into the business of college football, I had no idea where Auburn was geographically, and I had no idea where Clemson was geographically. And nobody would know that were it not for the football players. Yeah. And so don't tell me that somehow it's the reverse, that you guys need the brand of the university. Please, they need you. They need you to increase undergraduate enrollment. They need you to put up the fancy condos for the new students coming in, and everything else that happens at a place like Clemson when they win 2 national championships. That's what happens. That is the most vibrant, beautiful campus. I love going there. But that's the reality. And I think these schools, though, have done a good job over the last century of controlling the narrative, of making everything about the brand. And it's like all the administrators could go away, all the coaches could go away, all the fans could go away, and people could still watch players on TV, and that's where the money comes from. Mm-hmm. And so don't tell me it's the reverse. I'll get off my soapbox here. All right, let's talk a little bit about faith. Mm-hmm. I think this is why I know this is why we connected, right? And I think that this is our ministry. You want to talk about this too much. And I think when you and I talk about it with other people, maybe we code things a little bit. We don't forefront the faith conversation. We drop little hints, but it's not like front and center, right? Yeah. Since you and I talk here, now we can talk about whatever we want. We see this as our ministry, right?
Definitely.
But I think even people within our faith don't necessarily understand that. I've told
Yeah.
pastors that who are like, I don't know, man. I'm like, no, this is God's calling for my life. And
Mhm.
you think that too. How would you convince people? Let's start with set aside people who don't believe, set aside people who believe in Jesus and believe that God gives us a path to walk. How would you convince them, first and foremost, to see this?
Yeah.
Is
It's
football, Cassidy? How could it be faith? Go ahead.
it's so crazy you said that because, like, before we do anything, we start our day giving it to Him, and so,
Hmm.
like, Holy Spirit will prepare you for what is like, what's gonna present itself, and it's crazy that you asked that question because in James it said, "If you're living for people, then you are enmity of God." So, like, I'm not trying to convince any person,
Hmm.
but I will let my actions and my works show what I'm doing because if I'm trying to convince people, people's thoughts and opinions, they're fleeting.
Okay, I'm going to push back though. I'm going to push back because I think God does actually want us
He
to
does, yes,
convince people.
yes,
to
yes.
to say that the work we do in life for our Lord and Savior, whatever it is deeply meaningful. It's what
Mhm.
makes life meaningful when you know you're walking out God's path. I think people who don't see things that way sometimes can struggle about.
I'm more so in the sense saying in a people pleasing manner.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying. Like if I'm doing this to in a way to where I show my conviction towards why I'm using it as my ministry to appease to them and in the way in which how I serve and how I do things in light of my ministry, if that makes sense.
It does.
I
It
hope it does.
does.
Okay. Okay.
All right, let me phrase it a little bit differently then.
Mhm.
I've had a bunch of different pastors and people some I trust, some I
Yeah.
don't. And um, there's one who's I count as a good friend. He officiated my wedding, so you were there, you know what I'm talking about. And
Mhm.
um, I tried to convince him, I'll just say his name, he doesn't care, Pastor Sean Winters. And I remember trying to convince him in the early days, that this was a ministry, that I'm trying to do God's work and all that entails, right? And I remember him saying something like, "I see the potential," but it was more like hesitated to be sort of, I think, in full agreement that this could be the case,
Mhm.
right? Um, some people think of ministry work, it's like, oh, I'm going to go to this foreign country or something. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Right.
How would you convince? I don't know, man.
I would
I
say
want to go ahead. Go
oh,
ahead. You
my
go.
bad.
You go.
I would say I would convince people by showing them how much I've suffered
Hmm.
in this and the fruit of love that I have from it.
Hmm.
Because obviously in the word, we have to suffer in order to reap the glory of you know what I'm referring to.
Yes, I do.
And so everything that I've been through encountering this journey that God has had me on, it has entailed me suffering a lot.
Hmm.
But in order for me to express the love that Christ has for collegiate athletes that hasn't been shown in this realm. And that's why you have the divine things that have happened with men coming together for a cause. That's divine. With the world stopping because of it, that's divine. And with us coming together to do this, that's divine. Like, I feel when two are gathered in his name, anything that y'all agree on is God. Nothing. And obviously, that could be in other ways too, with the devil doing it as well. But for the sake of a greater good and a cause for human flourishing, what the CFBPA is doing, that's God. That's how I would convince it. And I hope I'm articulating this well for people to understand it. But that's what I would say.
That's awesome. Um, very, very well said. And yeah, I think that's
And it's not for greed, it's not for money. Like, I'm not doing this for
it's no money. It's no money. I know, but it's like I think some people would look at you and I having this conversation who don't believe, and they'd look at us and they'd say, "Man, these guys are laughing a lot, and they're laughing about suffering." And I think that is like you said, the fruit, the fruits of the spirit that we gain through this suffering that Christ has allowed for. That he suffered more than anybody can imagine, and so you know God sent his one and only son to earth to die in the most gruesome manner I could imagine. Right. And
Yeah.
so when we think about that and we think about what he did for us and, you know, everything we've been through, I think pales in comparison. And so, giving us that new life, but then also giving us those fruits. And like you said, like the love for collegiate athletes. Yes. That deep love and realizing that our God is a God that looks at exploitation and is angered by it.
Hmm.
And that's what he has shown and throughout history. And so I look at it and I'm like, well, of course, that would be the case in this case, and that he would need to fight through people to end this
Yeah.
exploitation, show his love, but also his joy. I just think that there's a way in which, it's peace that surpasses all understanding, is joy in the midst of chaos, right? These are the things that you and I both know to be true, right? And
Yes.
need to be shown to the world, through this unique ministry work. And
And I'll
so,
say,
go ahead.
and I'll say this, like, I was bitter at Washington State. Nobody, for me, I wouldn't have been able to drop the lawsuit and have the
Mm.
articulation to do it without Christ's love. Like, I wouldn't have the joy that I have. These decisions that I made, like, nobody goes from Washington State to the FCS school. I wouldn't have done that without God. I wouldn't have had the opportunity to go from FCS to Auburn if it wasn't for, God creating that door. Um, and that's just what's so amazing about God. Like, he doesn't need perfect people. He just needs a willing vessel. Um, and our stories are definitely exceptions. And one of very high mountains and very low valleys, but it's through it when you have that peace, like you said, that surpasses all understanding and the joy that you have from it. Um, and just the endurance to still stand and persevere. Like the fact that he's still keeping us to be able to do this is a testament within itself.
Indeed. I cannot add much to that. And I think this element, I haven't got to talk to anybody about this publicly. I think the fact that I'm doing it with you for the first time is perfectly appropriate given everything you've experienced and I've experienced and we've experienced together. Um, I just want to say close in saying, you know, what I'm very, very grateful that God has united us for
Hmm.
this project, because there were moments where I thought, you and others, it what just wasn't going to happen. And
Yeah.
now the fact that here we are, is about to be 2025, right? And it does feel like we're poised for something, some type of breakthrough, some type of corner
Yes.
turning. And there's lots of stuff we obviously can't talk about. But hopefully the world will see. And I think that this, I'm very grateful to God. I'm very grateful to you. I'm just blessed to have known you, and
Oh,
and to see where God takes this in the future. Truly,
and I'll say this too, because like after everything at Washington State had happened, I already knew what greed felt like. I already knew what it felt like to have people want to reach out for attention, for
Mm,
the wrong motives.
yeah,
And so when you had reached out to 22-1 about the CFBPA and everything that you are feeling that are prompting that, I mean, things that you felt and things that you want to do with the CFBPA, I was so skeptical and it took me a while to reach out. reach back out, because when you come to the end of yourself, you realize that each decision that you make is crucial in this life. And you want to be that much more intentional and present with what flows from it. What energies give off when you do talk to somebody. And as a father and husband that's new to all of this, like,
Mm.
I'm very precious with my time because my time is valuable. Um, and I'm thankful for you, Jason, because each time that we've talked, whether with the CFBPA or not, like, it's food, it's it's ways for me to grow in so many different areas, because we have families, and we're trying to live by faith. That's the only way to please God, is living by faith, which is hard because
In this world.
it's hard because there's no money tied to it.
Right.
There's no there's no selfish desires tied to it.
Yeah.
You can't because it's not of him.
Well,
But no, you go.
no, no, no. It's funny. Maybe we'll keep talking because you made me think of one thing here, which was, I think when I started this, I remember, I was doing this whistleblowing stuff for Minnesota players, and then founded the Players Association, and it seemed like this crazy project, and you get a lot of hate and so forth, and the, the one thing that where I would see, and I would be like, do you understand? Because it's a grift, or is it like I'm trying to make money? It's like you do not understand what we're
Mhm.
doing here.
Yeah.
And because it's like I reach out to play, like most of the time it goes back to our previous question of those influential players. We don't have some high profile, here's our quarterback who is the face of the college football player. We don't have that yet. Maybe at some point we will. I mean, I don't know. I'm not foreclosing it. But most of the conversation I have with guys, either current players or former players, I mean, current players is guys who are in trouble, who know who we are now, and they're reaching out to us. This is happening a lot now, of
Yeah.
just like, I'm in a bind, I need help. These are not players who have anything to give. They need something from us. They need assistance. And with former players, it's people who, a lot of the times, it's like they got some bad story for the end of their college career. It's not some guy who's like some high flying superstar or something. You know what I mean? And
And
so,
that's
but there's power in those people because there's so many more of those people than the guys, the Tom Brady's of the world, or whoever you want to talk about in terms of his success.
and
And I
that's
think that's what people don't understand. Go ahead.
and that's the gospel.
That's the gospel. A
And
bunch of ragtag people who never would have been chosen by the people in power, who were laughed at by the people in power, and fishermen and tax collectors and all. This is what I hope people will see, people will believe, because God turns graves into gardens. And these are people who have been forgotten. The people who are so associated with this organization primarily are people that are on the downside of college football. There are people who have been forgotten. There are whistleblowers. There are people who got into trouble because they exposed the realities of college football, including both of us. And there is only power in that group of people if they come together.
yep.
And that's what we see
Mhm.
happening here. And it's different,
Yeah. And I will say this, like, this is off topic as well, but like, for me, I've been thinking about this a lot just in terms of with elections and everything. Like, as a
Mm,
collegiate athlete, it's vital that we pay attention to what's going on in the political sphere because it affects
yeah.
us.
Yeah.
It affects us. And I realized that once I was in rooms talking with Senator like Cory Booker and Senator Chris Murphy, like, we have people in house that either will perfect the amateurism model
Mm,
or revolutionize it and make it better than what it should
yeah.
be. So like, it's important that we go out and vote and ask those questions. Like, that's why I love talking to Jason, because he's in those rooms, he's in those spaces that will advocate for us. And I believe God sends people to, like you said, to bring awareness and light to what has been dark for so long, and the
Mm,
NCAA has been in the dark for a while. And this, I'm grateful that I'm part of the light and just playing one piece to the light. That's what's more impactful for me and most important to me.
awesome.
Mhm.
All right. That's fantastic place to end. I'll close it out here. This is the College Football Players Association podcast. Is Alumni Member of the Month for, God willing, like October, if we get it up, if we get it up tomorrow.
It's okay.
Our guest is Kassidy Woods, former college football player, Washington State, University of Northern Colorado, Auburn University. My good friend. Cassidy, can't thank you enough for being here.
Man, thank you so much, Jason.